For this meeting via the Council's YouTube channel, Braintree District Council Committees. This channel has been set up to make sure that anyone can observe our democratic meeting. Please therefore remember this meeting can be watched anywhere at any time by anyone with an internet access. There are subtitles available by the YouTube broadcast. These are generated automatically by YouTube. The Council is not responsible for these subtitles nor their accuracy. There is a slight delay between the meeting and the broadcast of approximately 30 seconds. Webcasting officer, please can you confirm the broadcast is now running?
Hi Emma, it's now running.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Local Plan Subcommittee on Thursday the 16th July 2020. Before we commence the proceedings, I can confirm that the Council has adopted some basic etiquette rules for its remote meetings, and these are as follows. Only speak when the Chairman has invited you to do so. Members, please let the Chairman know that you wish to speak through the chat function. The Chairman will introduce speakers in the order in which they request to speak, unless there is a point of order which we will give way to. Please minimise all distractions while you're in the meeting. Members are asked to mute their microphones when not speaking and consider turning off their video to reduce interference on the audio feed. Please bear in mind that there may be a small delay between speaking and other attendees hearing you, so please bear this in mind when you're wishing to contribute to the debate. Presentation images and footage would have been shared with you prior to the meeting, and please indicate via the chat function if there is a problem with any of the presentations that you have this evening. When referring to reports, please quote page and paragraph numbers to aid members and officers to get to that point in the report. There is no private business for tonight's meeting. However, please can I remind members it is your responsibility to ensure that your venue and connections are private. If you lose connection at any point and unable to immediately rejoin the meeting, please call the meeting facilitator, and we have provided a telephone number to the subcommittee members for this purpose. Please only use the chat functions for the purpose prescribed for requesting to speak or to make a point of order. The chat function is subject to the access to information regimes of freedom of information, EIR, data protection. It is also subject to the rules of defamation and the Council's Code of Conduct. To assist with the managing of the chat function, the agenda items will be included as markers. This evening, the members of the Local Plan Subcommittee are Mrs. Gabrielle Spray, David Bebb, Graham Butlin, Tom Cunningham, Tony Everard, Patrick Horner, David Hume, Tom Walsh and Justin Wrench. There are councillors in attendance this evening who are observing at the invitation of the Chairman. Those councillors have a prefix of observer. They are not a member of the subcommittee and will not participate in the debate or be invited to speak. There are also officers in attendance this evening. These are Dominic Collins, Kim Cole, Emma Wisby, Alan Masso, Gary Sung, Julia O'Hara and Emma Goodins. Officers will speak at the invitation of the Chairman. This evening, our governance officer is Alison Webb, who will be taking the minutes and also reading the public question time statements. And my name is Emma Wisby, I'm the meeting facilitator. Chairman, we have no apologies for this meeting. I can confirm that the meeting is quorate and may proceed. Chairman, I now hand the meeting to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emma. Good evening, everyone. It's very nice to see you all, and welcome to this first virtual meeting of the Local Plan Subcommittee. My name is Councillor Gabrielle Spray, and I'm chairing this meeting. Just so you know, if I slightly disappear from your screen every now and then, it's only because I'm leaning over to get paperwork. I have quite a lot of papers this evening, so I might need to do that every now and then. As you know, the Council is fairly new to virtual meetings, so I'd just ask everyone to be patient and understanding as we work our way through this. Most of us, I have to say, have taken part in quite a number of virtual meetings now. This is the first one I've actually chaired, so let's hope we have a smooth run this evening. I'm being assisted by a governance officer and a meeting facilitator who will help me identify when people want to speak. But I would ask that if you want to speak or raise a point that you use the chat function. I think actually I can probably see everybody on my screen this evening. But if you do have any problems being seen or any problems with your internet connection, please remember to use the chat function. And if you could mute your microphone when you're not speaking, that would be helpful. Members, for the purpose of this meeting, when I seek your agreement, so for example, for the minutes, I will take silence as assent for everybody. Otherwise, this evening on the agenda items, I intend to take votes by way of a roll call, and I will go through that in a little bit more detail when we get to that point. As the meeting facilitator has confirmed the attendance of members and officers, we will now move on to the business of the meeting. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence, we have none. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do members have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest, or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest, and please indicate you wish to speak in the chat function. So I have Councillor Tom Walsh, please. Councillor Walsh.
Thank you, Councillor Spray. I declare a non-pecuniary interest in relation to item 8, Kagashaw Neighbourhood Plan. I'm a member of that group and the Kagashaw Parish Council.
Right, thank you, Councillor Walsh. Let me see, Councillor Butland. Sorry, Councillor Butland.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. I declare a non-pecuniary interest in that I am a non-remunerated director of North Essex Garden Communities Limited, to which reference is made on issues relating to the local plan.
Thank you, Councillor Butland. I don't have anybody else on the chat function. Right, just one moment.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Walsh has actually what we call a substantive non-pecuniary interest in agenda item 8. He's a member of the Parish Council Subcommittee for the Neighbourhood Plan. So therefore, our advice is that Councillor Walsh, at the end of agenda item 7, is invited to leave the meeting. Because the meeting is still quorum, we would invite him to retire for the evening. That won't affect the subcommittee from determining the business that is listed after agenda item 8. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Walsh, those are that is the advice from governance. So at the end of item 7, as we say, we will log you off from the meeting. All right. Thank you. Okay. Right. The next item, for no more declarations of interest.
Madam Chairman.
Oh. Yes, Councillor Butland.
I suspect it's because of the pressure of first chairing the meeting, but I think you may have a declaration yourself.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the reminder, Councillor Butland. Yes, I will declare an NPI on item 5, which is the local plan next steps. I am generally speaking in attendance at NEGC board meetings. I am a non-voting member, so you will all be pleased to hear I will remain in the meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Butland, for the reminder. Right, members, we move on to the, item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. The last meeting of the Local Plan Subcommittee was held on the 11th of February, which was about 6 months ago. Actually, to me, it feels as though it was in another age altogether, but the minutes have been available. I would like to seek your agreement on the minutes. If you do have any points you want to make, could you just pop it on the chat function, please? Otherwise, I'm going to take silence as an assent that we have approval of the minutes as an accurate record of the meeting held on the 11th of February 2020. Right, I've got
apologies, Councillor Mrs. Spray, your microphone is switched off. In response to Councillor Walsh's comments, the minutes have been circulated often published on the council's website. They have been made available to members. If Councillor Walsh does not wish to acknowledge the minutes at this stage, the members still can proceed to agree them by assent as you have described. Thank you, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Did you hear that, Councillor Walsh? Did you understand that? All right, so you do not have to agree the minutes if you're not comfortable with doing that because you haven't actually seen them. I'm not picking up any points from anyone else, so I will take it that the minutes of that meeting are approved. Members, before we move on to item 4, which is public question time, I am just going to make a short statement. There has been an enormous amount of comment on mainly some social media platforms, but also in print media, and I've also received emails about the recently released housing numbers and why that item is not on the agenda for this evening. So I'm just going to read the following statement. Members will be aware that since we received the proposed modifications to the shared strategic section 1 plan from the planning inspector, we have received a further letter from him drawing attention to the recently published figures on housing numbers from the ONS. He has asked for our views on these figures, and our housing specialists are now working on this. Examining the basis for the ONS housing numbers is complex. There are several different calculations to be taken into account, and it is not as simple as just replacing one figure in the draft local plan with another different figure. Those who are interested in looking at the process for determining housing figures should look to the objectively assessed need report in the evidence-based, which is document number 18. The 2016-based household projections, published in September 2018, were examined at a hearing session in January this year, including a discussion on the implications for the plan's housing requirements. The inspector concluded that there had, at that time, not been a meaningful change in the housing situation and that the figure of 716 homes per annum for Braintree remained soundly based, as submitted by Braintree in its draft local plan. We await the advice of our expert consultants on the latest housing projections before we can come to a conclusion on the matter. It has always been our aim to produce a plan which met the required housing needs with a buffer to safeguard against non-delivery of some sites. However, if the updated figures prove to be credible and robust, they will, in our opinion, bring about a significant change in the housing requirement, and as a council, we will strongly be urging the inspector to adopt the figure, which will reduce the number of homes required in Section 2 of our local plan. A last important point to note. The inspector has clearly said that he will seek the views of others. So until he does come to his conclusion, we cannot take the new figures as definite. It is for the inspector to ultimately conclude as to whether the housing number in the local plan is correct or for him to recommend an alternative number. Thank you, members. And I should have said, actually, I do apologise at the beginning of the meeting. Not only is it nice to see you, I very much welcome any members of the public who are watching via the YouTube link. Apologies for not doing that. Right, we can now move, members, on to agenda item 5, section 1, local plan next steps. And
apologies, Chairman, you need to take the questions for public question time.
Thank you, Emma.
You're welcome.
We'll get there eventually.
That's okay, Chairman.
Right.
Chairman, you have the schedule.
Yes, I have. I've got everything here. I just forgot to do it. Yes, we have 5 questions this evening. The first 2 are from members of the public, and then there are 3 from district councillors, not members of this committee, but who've submitted statements and questions. The first statement is from Mr. Matt O'Connell. The statement is going to be read by Alison Webb. Alison, good evening. Are you there?
Hello, Councillor Mrs. Spray. Yes, I'm here.
Good, thank you. Would you like to read Mr. O'Connell's statement?
Yes, thank you. This is the statement by Mr. O'Connell. I'm speaking as a Braintree resident who has participated in the local plan examination. A year ago, my wife spoke at the local plan committee on my behalf and highlighted that the new evidence was not fit to be submitted, due in particular to issues with viability and the rapid transport proposals, points which I then contributed in detail on in January at the examination. I have written to Councillor Spray over the last week to express grave concerns that officers are responding to the inspector's critical question on OAN without any scrutiny from councillors or the public at the local plan committee. While we have exchanged cordial messages on the topic, the situation has remained unchanged. There is the clear possibility for a reduction in Braintree's OAN as a result of the 2018 based ONS figures and the examination under 2012 NPPF. While the headline reduction from 13K to 7K in the ONS would not necessarily be replicated in full in the reduced OAN, it is indisputable that a significant reduction is possible. I would make the very clear point, and will do so at the examination if required, that it is also the only legally sound approach, given the way this plan is structured. Further plan reviews under new rules and calculations could be considered at a high level in the setting of the buffer. Indeed, that would largely have achieved itself through the proposed Section 2 allocations, but at the same time, a plan review in 5 years' time is sufficiently far off and abstract that only modest weight can be given to its relevance at the present time. This reduction would mean the Section 2 examination would carry little or no risk of not succeeding and would kick any discussion of the need for a new call to sites with the corresponding delay into the long grass. At the same time, it would be a huge mitigant for issues with the 5-year housing supply post-plan adoption, something which Councillor Butland and others have regularly cited as Braintree's primary day-to-day challenge on housing. Furthermore, it would obviously reduce the urban sprawl which all parties rightly refer to. It doesn't matter what one's view on location or housing form is, building for 70 to 80% above the statistical need is wrong. Wrong in a legal soundness context, wrong from a habitat destruction perspective, and wrong in the context of BDC's declared climate emergency. The interests of BDC and the other NEAs are likely not aligned here, such that the submission to the inspector is more sensitive and more demanding of councillor and public scrutiny. Indeed, there is a very strong argument that the options for the local plan cannot be considered appropriately or with an open mind without this point being taken into account. There is no real timing issue here. Certainly the inspector indicated flexibility and the priority should be getting a key point right. Nor is the apparent technical expertise of officers a mitigant. The topic is simply not that complicated, and while noting that they will have put a lot of hard work into the local plan, these officers are nevertheless the same ones who told the local plan committee previously that the revised evidence was fit for purpose. How can they be trusted to get this right without appropriate scrutiny? Finally, the fact that the public will be able to comment on this point to the inspector is simply not good enough as a reason for no scrutiny. Such formal representation should be effectively a last resort if meaningful public interaction at a stage prior to the submission of the respective information has not achieved any common ground. After all, this is also in the Council's best interests, as the more adversarial a local plan topic becomes, the more the Council loses control of the point. Here it seems that we simply back into the territory of Council versus public, rather than anything more constructive, which was certainly my hope post the examination in public and the inspector's conclusions. I would at the very least urge the Council to ask for a brief extension to the OAN submission, such that the matter can be scrutinised at the July full Council meeting, as the proposed submission from officers will definitely be ready on that timeline. My statement stands for itself, but I will leave you with this simple question. How can officers and councillors justify this absolutely key aspect of the local plan not receiving such scrutiny? That's the end of the statement by Mr. O'Connell. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much, Alison. Thank you, Mr. O'Connell, for your statement and question. Just to give you a response here and now, my statement, which I've just made, makes it quite clear that the recommendation as the portfolio holder for planning, my recommendation to full council will be that providing the figures are robust, we will have no reason to dispute them. If it is the council's decision that we proceed to public consultation, then we would strongly support representations from those interested in doing so being made to the inspector that he adopts the housing number figure. We can then proceed to the consultation on an examination of Section 2, with numbers being significantly lower than in the current draft Section 2. Right, thank you. Right, the next statement and question has been received from Mrs. Pearson of the Better Planning Campaign. Alison, would you like to read the statement? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement and question by Ms. Rosie Pearson. The Council has a one-off and time-limited opportunity to nearly halve the local plan housing target. The Inspector requires a response by the 24th of July. A halved target would go a long way towards preventing the unpopular sprawl of recent years. It would also prevent the garden community promoters behind Silver End, King's Dean, Monk's Wood, West Tay and West of Braintree from trying again. This new housing projection has a huge impact on the district. You could lock in the lower number now, benefiting from the plan being examined under the old NPPF. 91% of 790 residents I polled want the Council to take this opportunity to halve the housing target. Yet astonishingly, you have not added an extraordinary agenda item to address this surprise good news. Why not? Why are members willing to allow the very same officers who submitted not just one, but two sets of unsound evidence to the Inspector, despite numerous warnings from residents, to decide what to say to him this time? Residents, your voters, need you to stand up for us and fight our corner. Your refusal to address this issue seems to prove one thing, that it is not government forcing you to build thousands of homes. It is your wish to build more than double what the district needs without supporting infrastructure, changing our district forever. Please explain why you are not going all out to seize this opportunity to work for your residents. Thank you. That's the end of the statement of Ms. Pearson. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Mrs. Pearson, for your statement and question. I will refer you to the statement that I made a few minutes ago, which covers the points that you have made. Thank you. The statement read on behalf of Mrs. Pearson concludes those statements submitted by members of the public. We will now have the questions which have been submitted by district councillors, and these questions will also be read by our governance officer, Alison Webb. Alison, please could you read the question which has been received from Councillor James Abbott? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the statement by Councillor James Abbott. Madam Chairman and members of the Local Plan Committee, the report on next steps for Section 1 of the Local Plan is to be welcomed. The Leader of the Council asked at Cabinet on 13th of July if I would support the modified Section 1 with the inclusion of the remaining garden community east of Colchester. The answer is yes. The G&I Group, as the main opposition group at BDC, has reservations about the scale of all of the garden communities and their impacts, but the detailed planning and final scale of the east of Colchester site will now be largely for the authorities and residents at Colchester and tendering to determine. We support the inspector's option 1 to withdraw the 2 garden communities at West of Braintree and West Tay. West Tay in particular, with over 20,000 houses proposed, was a new town in scale, spanning up to 7 kilometres of what is currently largely countryside. We support the proposed modifications subject to public consultation and any necessary adjustments to secure a sound and sustainable plan. The alternative, as the report sets out, is to start again, with more years of delay, higher costs and more uncertainty. 2 years ago, I urged the administration to take a different path when the inspector was first unable to find Section 1 sound. Last year, we raised concerns about the additional evidence, including that the rapid transit system was not realistic. The inspector in his recent letter stated that the RTS routes 3 and 4 have not been shown to be deliverable and are at odds with the plan aspirations for integrated and sustainable transport networks. That is effectively what we said repeatedly last year at BDC meetings, not to cause trouble, but because that's what the evidence said, but we were not listened to. Over 6 years, NEGC has spent nearly £7 million on the Garden Communities project, and BDC has spent approximately £1.25 million on Section 1, excluding internal staff costs. Despite that time and costs, as things stand, not a single home will be built in Braintree district from the Section 1 garden communities. Whilst joint working has been a good thing, Section 1 has largely been a failure, and even now, the administration claims its approach protects the district from speculative development. In reality, many communities have seen significant speculative unplanned development, due in part to the delays caused by Section 1. Question: will the leadership of the Council recognise and explain to residents the failure of the Section 1 plan and accept that lessons need to be learned? The report identifies that 2,710 homes are removed from Braintree district numbers as a result of the proposed modifications, but the Section 2 total, due to the cumulative consents and homes built during the Section 1 delays, now stands at 15,049. That is 729 homes above the required number in the plan period 2013 to 2033, albeit accepting the various adjustments that may be needed. Progress now depends on all 3 North Essex authorities agreeing the same way forward. If they do, there will be a 6-week consultation, and due to COVID-19 restrictions, a full range of consultation may not be possible. Question: can virtual events be held to support the consultation, such as on Zoom, to give presentations and answer questions from residents? Final question: when we get to Section 2, can it be ensured that the process takes into account the views of local communities as far as is possible, and in so doing avoids the conflict that Section 1 has caused? That's the end of Councillor Abbott's statement and questions. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Councillor Abbott, for your statement and your questions. In answer to your first question, I well understand the differing views and political points that you wish to make, but we are more interested in moving forward with this process as quickly as possible. I am quite sure that you, Councillor Abbott, will be making further similar points at full council on the 27th of July, when we can engage in a debate on the matter. The second question, which is around how the consultation will be managed, just to remind Councillor Abbott and anyone else listening, this is the inspector's consultation. We will assist him in any way he requires us to. Obviously, given the current situation with COVID-19, things are likely to have to be done slightly differently. So as far as virtual events are concerned, using Zoom for that matter, I think this will be a matter for discussion between the authorities and the inspector, and we will take our lead from him. But obviously, we will all of us do our very best to ensure that public and interested parties can engage as fully as possible. And the third question, as we have done with section 1, we will take everybody's views into account equally. There will, of course, be a consultation process for section 2 and then a public examination, and this will be undertaken by a different inspector who will be appointed by the inspectorate. Right, thank you very much. The next question is from Councillor Paul Thorogood. Alison, would you please read Councillor Thorogood's question? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the question by Councillor Paul Thorogood. The Home Secretary and Witham MP, Priti Patel, has responded to Planning Inspector Roger Clue's finding the proposed garden communities of West Braintree and West Hay unsound. Priti Patel said, "These plans have been controversial and heavily criticised. Many opportunities to reflect and make changes have been missed, and public confidence has been undermined. 2 years ago, the inspector warned that the plans were not good enough and the lessons have not been learned. We all want to see new housing built in a responsible and sustainable way in this part of Essex, but the way these plans have been put together and promoted has been misguided." The Witham MP also criticised Colchester Borough Council over the proposals for West Hay, which was a joint venture with Braintree District Council and the 2 other NEAs, so therefore isn't BDC equally implicated? Priti Patel added, "They ignored the warning signs 2 years ago and pressed ahead regardless. Millions of pounds of taxpayers' money have been lost, a major road project has been delayed, and their housing plans are in crisis. This latest letter from the inspector is a damning indictment of gross incompetence. They can no longer bury their heads in the sand and now face a day of reckoning." Can I therefore ask Madam Chairman of the Local Plan Committee, who is also the Cabinet member responsible for the local plan, is the Home Secretary right? That's the end of Councillor Thorogood's question. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Councillor Thorogood, for your question. The MP for Witham is, of course, perfectly entitled to her opinion. I think her views on the garden communities and on our draft local plan are well known. However, as the chair of this committee and the Cabinet member for planning, and as a resident of Braintree district, unlike the Home Secretary, I support and continue to do so the vision of long-term, sustainable, good quality development for our part of North Essex. Thank you.
Apologies, Chairman, your microphone's switched off.
Sorry, thank you, Emma. The final question, Alison, which has been received is from Councillor Nick Unsworth. Please, would you read Councillor Unsworth's question?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is the question by Councillor Nick Unsworth. My question relates to the latest letter from the inspector, IED 023. What is the Local Plan Subcommittee's reaction and what actions will be taken based on the revelation that BDC does not need the full 14,320, but some 7,000? Even with a buffer and a flexible allowance as included in the original numbers, the ONS figures indicate that BDC only needs roughly half the current 715 houses per annum. Since these numbers significantly change the planned period target and consequently the 5-year supply, will the Local Plan Subcommittee now advise the FC that the housing numbers in the local plan need revising in an effort to further protect our district from speculative development? That's the end of the question by Councillor Nick Unsworth. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you, Councillor Unsworth, for your question. I will simply refer you to the statement that I made just before question time. Thank you. Right, that concludes all questions. I will now proceed to item 5, section 1, local plan next steps. which members you can find set out on pages 5 to 107 of your agenda. And please can I invite Emma Goodings, Head of Planning and Economic Growth, to set out the report. Thank you, Emma. Over to you.
Thank you, and good evening, members. It's lovely to see you all, albeit virtually. So as this committee is aware, the Council received a letter from the Planning Inspector on the Shared Strategic Section 1 in May this year. Given the time that has elapsed since that publication, I hope that all members have had the chance to read that letter in detail. The main conclusions of the Inspector are set out from paragraph 1.5 of your committee report tonight, and also the full letter is attached as Appendix 1. So in summary, the Inspector's letter concluded that the local plan as submitted could not be found sound, and that the west of Braintree and Colchester Braintree borders garden communities should be removed from the plan. He did, however, believe that the tendering Colchester borders garden community was deliverable. The Inspector outlined his view on the next steps for the local plan, and these are the subject of this report. So the first option the Inspector set before us is to accept modifications to the Section 1 plan, and I'll go into a bit more detail later on in this presentation about what those modifications are. This will allow the local plan to move forward towards adoption. This offers the local authority the quickest route towards an adopted local plan in the district, which provides certainty for residents and developers. It is also the cheapest option, as it makes the best use of evidence base and resources already spent on the local plan. The disadvantages of this option are that the removal of the garden communities could lead to challenge from those developers and landowners who had previously been included in the plan. The Inspector's second option is to withdraw the plan, essentially starting the local plan process again. This had the advantage of providing a fresh start on the local plan, using up-to-date housing figures, which could be lower for Braintree District than those currently in the plan, and also using the policies of the updated MPPF. However, this option would leave the council without an up-to-date local plan, probably for 3 or more years, meaning that the district would remain vulnerable to speculative and poorly planned development. This option would also come at a significant cost. Now, the NEAs cannot adopt a local plan contrary to an inspector's recommendation, and therefore if the council was to consider that neither of those options were appropriate or ones that they wanted to follow, then they would need to challenge the inspector's findings. This could be done by asking the inspector to consider further evidence on the garden communities as part of this examination, or to lobby the Secretary of State, who has the power to call in the local plan and consider it himself. Both of these options would involve significant costs and delays to the adoption of the local plan, and there is no guarantees, of course, that either option would result in a different outcome. Having weighed up all these options, therefore, officers from across the 3 local authorities involved are recommending that the inspector's option 1, to accept modifications to the local plan, is accepted as the way forward. Both Colchester and tendering councils have considered this recommendation at committees earlier this week, and both have approved that recommendation as a way forward. If this council also accepts the inspector's option 1, then the next steps are to go through the modifications procedure. This is a fairly standard practice, where the inspector recommends changes to primarily policies which he believes are necessary to make the local plan sound. In order to ensure that members have full transparency and a full view of the implications of those modifications, we ask the inspector to produce a draft of those, which have been published as Appendix 2 to your report today from page 77. A summary of those modifications can also be found in paragraph 3.4 of this report. But broadly, and with particular relevance to Braintree, are the modifications MM1 to MM17, which are changes to the vision, strategic objectives, a short new policy which sets out our contributions to be sought to mitigate the impacts of new development on European habitats of importance, and minor changes to policies 2 to 6. Draft modifications MM41, 42 and 43 are to remove policies SP9 and SP10 and map designations, both of which relate to the Colchester Braintree borders and the West of Braintree garden communities. The remaining modifications in the list, and there are 47 of them altogether, mainly relate to policies SP7 and SP8, which are the 2 garden community policies left in the plan, and they are of particular relevance, obviously, to Colchester and tendering. With thanks to Councillor Abbott for pointing out, on MM25 within your report, the word community seems to have been erroneously struck out. This is on page 99 of the report. This was within the draft modifications that the inspector sent to us, and therefore we will need this will need to bring this to his attention, and he will be able to correct if necessary for his final modifications. As well as those main modifications, minor modifications will also be required to the supporting text in the local plan. This would be to correct typos or to follow through the changes that have been made to the policies to the supporting text. These are not required to be consulted on, are within the power of the local authority to approve, and the exact changes would depend on the nature of the final modifications proposed by the inspector. Following on from our council meeting, therefore, the NEAs will write to the inspector and confirm their intention to take the plan forward to modifications. The inspector would then provide his formal list, and it would be subject to a 6-week public consultation period. Dates are yet to be confirmed, as they would in part depend on correspondence and timings from the inspector, and also on the completion of an updated sustainability appraisal, which would need to consider the changes the inspector is proposing, and also an updated habitats regulation assessment. But we hope that the consultation will be able to start in August and run through till September. This is a consultation on behalf of the inspector, and as before, the process and materials which we undertake as part of that consultation would be approved by the inspector. All responses, while submitted to the 3 authorities and processed by the authorities, are then considered directly by the inspector. It is envisaged that this will be a largely virtual consultation, with encouragement given to read and respond to the document electronically. However, paper copies of the document and the response forms will be made available wherever possible, and policy officers will be available on the phone and via email, as always, to answer any questions on the process of the modifications and to assist residents as required. Once the inspector has all this information and is satisfied, it will be at that point that he will issue a final letter on section 1 and with his modifications in it, and the ability then to adopt the local plan, the section 1 local plan. In the meantime, and while we work through that process, officers are of course working on the section 2 local plan with a view to progressing that to examination with PINs as quickly as possible. The recommendations, therefore, are in your report on pages 16 and 17 of your agenda packs. Please note that these are recommendations to council, who will make the final decision. Can I also please direct your attention to recommendation C, which should say in brackets, of course, that the other authorities who must take this decision are Colchester and Tendring, not Colchester and Braintree. And with thanks again to Councillor Abbott for bringing that to my attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, very much for setting out quite clearly what our next steps are. I have several members wishing to speak who indicated on the chat function. Councillor Walsh, you were first, so would you like to ask your questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a few questions, but I first want to just briefly slightly elaborate on your response to Councillor Abbott's question, the first part. He asked, after some years of work on the plan and expenditure of about £7 or £8+ million, surely as leader of the specialist committee, Councillor Spray, you'd be able to give some indication as to why the inspector has twice found the plan unsound, and are there no lessons from a planning viewpoint to be learned? I don't think it's reasonable to say it's just to be left to another meeting. This is the first meeting of the local plan committee and you chair it.
On a point of order, Madam Chairman, what page is Councillor Walsh relating to? I thought this was a debate about the next steps. Councillor Walsh seems to want to go back. We'll have that opportunity at full council. The purpose of this committee is to consider the paper and the recommendations that are before us tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Butland. My question wasn't to yourself with respect. It was on a planning matter that had been put by a fellow councillor. And I don't think the question was political. I think it was a planning question as to what lessons and can we learn from this. I think it's a reasonable question, and I'm sure the chair of the committee is able to answer it.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. I'm perfectly satisfied with my statement, but actually we are on agenda item 5 of tonight's meeting, which is a discussion on the modifications, the main modifications suggested by the inspector and how we go forward. So I'm perfectly content with how I have responded so far. If you'd like to move on to your next questions, I'd appreciate
I would
it. Thank
do so,
you.
but I would like to record a reasonable question was not answered. I do have some questions, and I'll put them in order if I may. Presumably it's easiest if I put them one at a time. And my first question, and I'm not going over what's previously been asked about housing, this is a separate question. Is Braintree District Council proposing to have a 5% buffer to add to the housing delivery test, plus a 10% additional element of flexibility or non-delivery? Is it not correct that if the housing requirement, which I think is our case on the 5-year supply, is very close to being met, you only need to add the 5%, especially as the total level of built to date with planning permission and allocated sites actually exceeds the housing requirement. And therefore, were we to add 10% to the 5%, we'd be adding a contingency upon a contingency.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. I'm going to refer this to Emma Goodings to give you an answer. Emma, thank you.
Thank you. So unfortunately, there are two different processes at work here. So there's the issue around the 5-year supply and there's issue around the local plan. So first of all, on the 5-year supply, due to our current record of delivery, the policy requires us to add a 20% buffer to the 5-year supply. So this means we have to take the 5-year supply target, then add 20% to it, and that becomes the level of housing that we must meet in the next 5 years. And that the detail of that, if you're interested, Councillor Walsh, is set out within our authority monitoring report, which was updated as of the 31st of March this year, and provides a full breakdown of the figures that relates to and how that has come to pass. But that is a government requirement that we add 20% to the 5-year supply. Which therefore is a separate matter to the local plan overall target, which then becomes a 15-year target. And within the local plan, within the text of the local plan, it states that we would add 10% to the overall figure across the 15 years, which would allow flexibility and non-delivery of sites or sites not to come forward as quickly as possible. So I appreciate the slightly confusing point. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the planning system that means there are two slightly different things happening at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma Goodings. My second question, it's a very brief one, Councillor Gabrielle Spray, and I think a number of people might be interested in this. As the inspector has said, we have two options, to withdraw or to modify. What are the approximate costs and timescale of both of these options put by the inspector? In other words, and I think this is what our residents are interested, under both withdraw and modify, when might we actually expect to have an adopted local plan?
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. Emma, could you give a response, please?
Yeah, so certainly we've been working on the timetable that if we were able to proceed with modifications on the local plan, we'd be looking at a result on the section 1, hopefully a letter back from the inspector in the autumn time. This is of course completely dependent on the inspector. It is for him to determine when he's willing to write to us. So that would be a letter on section 1 in the autumn, and then moving on to section 2, hopefully with examination sessions taking place sort of the turn of this year, and with the final adoption of the plan, if all went smoothly, in spring, summer next year. That timetable, of course, doesn't take into account any delays which may result now as a result of the housing number question. There is a chance that there always has been a chance, but perhaps there is now an enhanced chance that the inspector will be required to reopen the examination sessions as a result of the potential change in the housing figure. If he were to do that, that would add a delay to the process. Hearings are required to give a 6-week notice period before hearings can be undertaken, plus the time it would take for both us and for participants to prepare evidence. So I would envisage that would at the least be a further 3-month delay to the adoption of the section 1. And in terms of the other option, withdrawing and starting again, I think realistically you're looking at a 2 to 3 year process to start a local plan from scratch, gather the evidence, undertake 3 separate rounds of public consultation, and then submission and adoption. So yeah, you'd be looking at around 3 years from now before you've got an adopted local plan in place.
Thank you. I just have two other fairly brief questions. The penultimate one, please, Councillor Spray, is concerning recommendation. I think it's C on page 16, where it's proposed to continue with section 1 of the local plan on the basis of modifications. As all three North Essex authorities need to move in step, what would happen if either Tendring or Colchester or both, should they decide to go for option 2, i.e. to withdraw the local plan and therefore not progress their shared garden community or new town east of Colchester?
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. My understanding is that in that case, we can none of us proceed, but I will just ask Emma to confirm that.
Yes, that's the position. We believe that all three authorities need to vote for the same recommendation in order for the local plan to proceed. Happily, as I mentioned in my presentation, Colchester and Tendring have already had their local plan committees this week, and both have approved option 1 as their recommended way forward.
Again, thank you. And my last question, I wonder, I attended a national planning conference supported by Braintree at the end of April this year. And I wonder, in terms of something that the interim chief planner, Dr. Michael Bingham, said at this conference, which was in the public domain, and I think I sent you a note, Councillor Spray, would Braintree Council rethink putting in any more time, effort and cost into effectively a new town strategy? When at that conference, Dr. Michael Bingham said that the government, and I'm basically quoting, I made a verbatim note, Dr. Bingham said, we will consult on building greater housing within and nearer to urban areas. And secondly, he said, there will be a £400 million fund, including a national map, to bring forward brownfield sites. Would we not like to consider some of these aspects before proceeding any further? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walsh. I will defer again, I think, to Emma on that. It's her area of expertise. Emma, thank you.
Thank you. So yes, as probably members will be aware, there have been various conversations about changes and amendments to the planning system as a whole over the last few weeks and months. We are waiting a planning policy paper, which we believe we had hoped it would be a green or a white paper. We do now believe it will just be a policy paper from government, which will set out, hopefully in a bit more detail, some of the things that they have been talking about recently. The Garden Communities programme that we were part of obviously still exists. The government has still, that programme is still running via Homes England, and there are many, the Colchester Tendring Borders Garden Community, Beaulieu Park in Chelmsford, schemes in South Essex and in Harlow are still part of that programme and are still proceeding on that basis. However, we wait to see updated thrust of government policy, I guess, within the white paper to see what that would mean for us, particularly when we're looking at review of the local plan. We'd need to consider, of course, the up-to-date policy position, the thrust of government policy, and what was right for the district at that point, and all that would be considered as part of a new local plan process. But certainly, if there's any brownfield funding going around, we'd obviously look at that in some detail and see if there were any sites that we could potentially help secure funding for to bring them forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Councillor Walsh. That finishes your questions. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Fine. The next member of the committee I have wishing to speak is Councillor Cunningham. Councillor Cunningham.
Madam Chairman, good evening. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your earlier statement, and also for the questions asked by members of the public and other member colleagues. Obviously, as we meet tonight, we would have hoped to have met in slightly different circumstances with a slightly different outcome. However, we must reflect on the current position and collectively work together in the interests of all our communities. I think it's fair to say that we believe the principles which we championed, infrastructure-led development with the required social and transport infrastructure coming on stream with new houses, well thought out planned communities, turning new homes into communities with good job prospects nearby. These principles perhaps should still act as a guide for future decision making. I would say, Madam Chairman, I think it's important to make this point, that while one eye on the future is not a desire to overdevelop. And that is why I think the updated figures from the Office of National Statistics regarding the potential objectively assessed need should be worked towards. I appreciate this is early in the debate, Madam Chairman, and other colleagues will want to contribute. But at this stage, I would like to move the recommendations on page 6 of the agenda, but also add an additional recommendation F to go as a package of recommendations to full council. And the wording of that recommendation, Madam Chairman, I would like to propose is as follows. That should a reduced objectively assessed need figure be considered to be an accurate position of the housing need in the district, Braintree District Council will, during the consultation, make representations and encourage residents to make representations that an updated figure be adopted for the district of Braintree. That ends the recommendation. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. So just to be clear, you are moving the 5 recommendations on page 6 with the additional recommendation as just described by you. Is that correct?
That's correct, Madam Chairman. Thank you.
Right. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you, Councillor Butland. Councillor Butland, do you wish to speak?
Yes, Madam Chairman, if I may. I think that's a very sensible proposal by Councillor Cunningham. But can I refer first of all to the contributions from the 2 members of the public? I thought Mr. O'Connell was a very thoughtful contribution, and I think there are several issues that he raises which we shall want to go into. I do, however, feel the need that I must speak strongly in support of our officers who have been criticised tonight quite unfairly. I think that's because the criticism has come from people who, like me, do not have planning qualifications, do not have planning skills, and do not have planning expertise. And I think if people were to speak from a position of knowledge, they would recognise that our officers worked extremely hard over the period of the last 5 or 6 years. Also, if they had any knowledge of how local government works, they would recognise that officers do not make decisions. Officers advise members, and we members make decisions. So if anyone wants to be critical, they need to criticise members, councillors, who of course do have the right, like this evening, to be able to speak back on their own accord. And I feel very strongly that as leader of any organisation, whether it's this council or a private business, I will always speak in support of my staff and our staff. And our staff have acted extremely professionally throughout the whole of this. If I can then move on to where we are, clearly, had the situation been that we still needed to find a significant number of houses, as indeed was the case when we went to inspection, and let us not forget, we can all look back now, but the inspector in his report accepted that the housing numbers we were working on were correct and supported. No errors, anything like that, and he made quite clear that his view was that the figure of 716 houses per year was sound. We took that decision on the advice of our officers. That advice was correct, and we followed that correct advice. Now, clearly, the situation potentially has changed. We now have, in the last week or so, new figures from the ONS, which aren't just potentially a small modification, but almost a 50%, potentially a 50% reduction in the number of houses over the period 2015 to 2033 that this authority will be required to make provision for. Now that 50% is a significant reduction. And had we have had that figure 2 years ago, we would not have been planning for the figures that we had in the local plan that we put forward, because the inspector would have had a quite different report by telling us that we were planning for far more houses than we actually would need. So at the moment, we need to, I think, exercise some caution on these figures. Why do we need to exercise caution? First of all, we need to satisfy ourselves that the figures produced by ONS are both robust and credible, as you put, Madam Chairman. Because it's no good us just accepting them and then going down the line and into a section and not convincing the inspector. So we do need to find out and be satisfied ourselves that those figures are robust. But if they are robust, then I think we would all, and I suspect there will be very few people who will be marching in the streets to say, no, 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 let's build houses that aren't needed, because we have never argued that we should build houses that aren't needed. We were working on, to use a government phrase, the best scientific advice that was available at the time. And that advice has only just changed. So we will need to look at that evidence, along, of course, with our partners in Colchester and tendering, and to respond to the inspector as he has requested. We then will have to recognise that a reduced housing number will not please everyone. It will not please some developers. It will not please some landowners. And they are also going to make representations to the inspector. And they will be making those representations, I suspect, to undermine the figures and say to the inspector, no, 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 you shouldn't move away from the view that you took in your original draft report that the figures were sound. Now, that is something which will have to be played out in front of the inspector. And as was said by Mrs. Goodings, there is every possibility that he might wish to reopen the hearing to deal with that issue of housing numbers. However, as Councillor Cunningham's proposal is, if we as members, and I emphasise members, are satisfied that the proposed figures from the ONS are robust, and in fact will mean that instead of 716 houses, we will need, and I'm not going to name a figure because that will then become a target, but will be less than 716. I think, Madam Chairman, if we think of a seesaw, we are the right-hand side of the seesaw, which I fear might be the left-hand side of your screen, because I'm not quite sure. We're probably at the highest number that we have in our local, 716. I can't see any circumstances in which that figure will go higher. How far the other side of that seesaw, how low it goes, I don't think we can tell at this moment. But clearly, if the ONS figures are acceptable, it is possible that they will be significantly lower. If that after the consultation period is accepted by the inspector, and he will be the one who will set the housing figure now, that's my understanding, that he will say, in the light of this, I don't think I'm going to change, it's 716, or in the light of this, the figure is going to be XYZ. We will then need to look at that XYZ figure and look at how that would fit in with our current Section 2. Now, until a few weeks ago, I'll be quite honest, I thought we were going to have to go through a process where we would have to make some unpopular decisions to add to the section 2 to find more additional sites to make up for the shortfall as a result of the abandonment of the west of Braintree and the West Tay garden communities. We might now be in a position where we actually have to decide which sites to take out. And I'll bet a pound to a penny there will be as much argument about which sites go out as there will be about which sites stay in. Because you will never, in my view, on planning issues, keep everyone happy. But that's a jump away. That is a hurdle that we will need to deal with as and when we have a clear decision from the inspector on those housing numbers. But just going back to the point that Councillor Cunningham made when moving the motion, if we feel as a council that a lower number of houses is justified on the basis of the ONS figures, then I'm sure, Madam Chairman, it will be your recommendation as the planning portfolio holder, supported, I suspect, possibly unanimously by the council, that is what we will want to do and urge the inspector to accept a lower figure. And if that is the case, I undertake that as a council, we will do our best to encourage as many of our residents to get in touch with the inspector supporting that view. So there's been a lot of discussion recently about why aren't we doing this, that, and the other. We are not jumping in to a decision. We're not saying tonight, well, it won't be 716, it'll be something else. We are doing the work. I very much hope that that work will result in a much lower, but certainly a lower housing requirement for this district. Now, of course, bear in mind, in 2 years' time, we'll have another set of figures. And like temperatures, they go up and they go down. But if we can get a local plan in on these figures, then those will be the figures that we will at least be working for until the next review of the local plan, by which time who knows where local government will be and whose responsibility that will be. So I support Councillor Cunningham's suggestion of adding that recommendation on. I think it's very sensible. I would undoubtedly want my support for officers to be recorded, because it is unfair to publicly criticise officers who do not, in their independent way, have the opportunity to speak for themselves. Bear in mind, if officers make mistakes, I'll be the first one to say we need to learn from it. I do not believe that any of our officers throughout this have made mistakes. They have made judgments which they have given us. They've given us on occasions the answer is A or it could be B. We as members have taken the decision. And it is totally wrong for members of the public to try and say that this is all the fault of a few officers. They are professional, they have acted professionally, and I think we are extremely grateful as a council for all that they've done. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Butland, and I will ensure that your support for officers is recorded. I do have other speakers, but first, could I just ask Councillor Everard, you haven't indicated on the chat function you wish to speak, but I have seen your hand waving a couple of times. So would you like to speak? Councillor Everard.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to clear something up. On page 11, 2.7, turning to option 2, I just wanted to clear this up. If we scrapped our present plan, 1 and 2, completely and started again, would we lose any legislative advantages? And would that mean more, well, it certainly would mean a lot more costs. Did you get that?
Yes, yes, I did. Thank you, Councillor Everard.
I've got some more, but I won't bother with those.
It's all right. It's up to you.
Yeah.
If that's the end of your question, I will ask Emma Goodings to respond.
Yes, please.
Yep,
I was going
all
to
right.
say, I was going to want to say that the garden communities had a lot of positives, and as I've heard tonight, hopefully a lot of this will be taken over. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Everard. Emma, would you like to respond to Councillor Everard, please?
Thank you. So in terms of the adopted local plan, we currently have the adopted local plan from 2005 and the core strategy from 2011. Obviously, both those documents are of a certain age now, and particularly a local plan that's been adopted over 5 years has significantly less weight. And since we adopted our local plan in particular, there have been 2 complete changes to national planning policy through NPPF 2012 and the later version. So if we were to continue without a plan for 3 years, we would be still relying on those plans, which become increasingly out of date as time goes by, and they become increasingly less relevant for inspectors to be able to apply weight to those policies, which may be in some cases at odds to current national policy. If you have the local plan section 1 and section 2 in place, that is of course an up-to-date local plan for the purposes of the development plan. Yes, it was produced during the previous NPPF, so there are elements of it which aren't as up to date as we would like, but yes, it would give you a better protection. Inspectors would be able to give weight to that as the adopted plan, and we would essentially discard seems like a harsh word, but essentially the 2005 plan and the 2011 plan become obsolete, and that would be the single plan that we would rely on. So yes, there is an advantage in terms of policy of having a plan, an up-to-date plan in place.
Thank you, Emma. Councillor Everard, has that sufficiently answered your question?
Oh. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay,
it was an area that I wasn't quite sure about. Yeah.
No, that's fine. Good.
Thank you.
Right. The next person I have wishing to speak is Councillor Bowers. Councillor Bowers.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yeah, I'd just like to say that I totally support the recommendations before us tonight, including the additional recommendation from Councillor Cunningham. I concur fully with Councillor Butland's comments on especially that all what he said, but especially that recommendation, and agree with all those thoughts. And I would have thought hopefully everyone will support and be in agreement with that. I also would like to totally support what Councillor Butland has said about the officers that we have in our authority. I think for those criticisms are totally wrong and totally out of order. And the expertise, the knowledge, the dedication, the planning expertise we have in our officers, we are lucky to have that at this authority. And what has been put in front of us, I think we are second to none in that. So I'd like to put that on record that I totally agree with that, because I think those comments are totally out of order. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers, and I'm sure that officers will appreciate your comments and your support. Thank you. The next member I have wishing to speak is Councillor Bebb. Councillor Bebb.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, I totally support the proposal from Councillor Cunningham on the addition to the recommendations. I think that's very appropriate. And I echoing what Councillor Butland has said, in terms of we have now a unique opportunity to capture a particularly low number. And as Councillor Butland said, the number could change in 2 years' time. It could well change. It's likely to change. And in fact, now we've got the opportunity to perhaps lock into that if we can. Having had a discussion with Emma Goodings this afternoon in terms of how the ONS have derived this new figure, I'm a bit alarmed to see the methodology seems to be, in my opinion, a little flaky. And so therefore I think we ought to go for it now we can, while before it changes yet again. So yes, I thoroughly support the proposal and also roundly endorse what has been said in terms of criticism of officers. They work very professionally, very hard, and it's very unjust that there should be any implied criticism of them. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bebb. I must say I like the idea of going for it. Most definitely. Right, I don't have any other indication on the chat function of any other member wishing to speak. So I will therefore move forward. And members, the recommendations are set out on page 6 of your report. They've been moved by Councillor Cunningham and seconded by Councillor Butland. I'll proceed to the vote shortly, but just what I'm going to do first, as I say, the recommendations are in your report, but I'm actually just going to read through the additional recommendation from Councillor Cunningham for clarity. And it is that should a reduced OAN figure be considered to be an accurate position of the housing need in the district, Braintree District Council will, during the consultation, make representations and encourage residents to make representations that an updated figure be adopted for the district of Braintree. So I'm now going to proceed to the vote. I'm going to call each member's name in alphabetical order. Members, please would you indicate clearly when your name is called whether you are for, against or abstaining that these recommendations go forward to full council. Councillor Bebb.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Butland.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Everard.
For.
Councillor Horner. Councillor Horner.
Chairman, if I may, Councillor Horner, your microphone is switched off. Please, could you switch your microphone on for the vote, please?
Yes, I think please, if you could, Kim. Right, Councillor Horner, we can now hear you. Could I have your response to the vote? For or against or abstain, please?
For.
Set up high contrast.
Thank you. Councillor Hume.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For to all.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That is unanimous. And those recommendations will therefore go forward to full council on the 27th of July. Thank you for your questions and I think a good debate. So I am now, members, going to proceed to item 6, which is the Statement of Community Involvement Update. Members, this report is set out on pages 108 to 142 of your agenda. And please can I invite Alan Massow, Principal Planning Policy Officer, to set out the report. Alan, over to you. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Councillor Spray. The Statement of Community Involvement is the strategy which Braintree District Council uses to consult members of the public on development documents and planning applications. The authority has to update its SCI regularly, and if you remember, members considered the issue back in February. However, this update is a result of the current pandemic and aims to offset the difficulties when we are unable to consult face-to-face with members of the public. The majority of changes seek to ensure that consultations are carried out online, with the option of people to be consulted via hard copy documents where that is not possible, as well as being as flexible as possible when consulting the public. An example of this can be given during the current Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan consultation, where we have come up with an arrangement with the Parish Council and provided them with hard copies for people in the village who are unable to access the internet, and those people can book those hard copies to look at. It is proposed that the changes in the SCI are, or the majority of the changes in the SCI are temporary and will expire on the 31st of December 2020. However, some additional changes are proposed. It's actually table 7.1 to 7.5 now. These changes cover publicity requirements for plan applications, and they are changes as a result of legislative changes, and these tables therefore will need to be updated permanently. Unfortunately, we didn't get this table we've only recently had the table, so we do need to have a quick look to see whether or not any other changes will be required to the supporting text, although I expect those changes would be minor in nature. The changes in the SCI are set out in the report as either crossing throughs or underlined, and it is proposed to make these changes with the recommendation on page 112. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alan. Does any member wish to speak to this? Could you indicate on the chat function, please, if you do? Haven't got anybody so far. Right, okay. Just giving you a couple of minutes in case you do. All right, members, actually this was a fairly straightforward report. As Alan said, it is an update because of the change in circumstances due to COVID-19. I do need somebody to please move the recommendation as set out on page 112, which is that the Statement of Community Involvement 2020 is updated to reflect changes in government guidance and the publicity requirement for all applications. Could somebody move, please?
Happy to move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Could I have a seconder?
Seconded, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Buckland. Right, okay, if nobody... Oh, Councillor Bebb, apologies. I've just seen that you did off to move, but Councillor Bowers beat you to it. I'm now going to move to the vote on that, to approve the recommendations as set out on page 109. I won't read through it again. So I'm going to do the roll call again. If you could clearly say for, against or abstain when I call your name. Councillor Bebb.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Butland.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Everard.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Hume.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That is unanimous. And therefore, we will now proceed to agenda item 7, Essex Coast Recreational Disturbance Avoidance and Mitigation Strategy. And just to advise you members, I'm only going to say that once. It's a bit of a mouthful. So from now on in, I'm going to refer to it as RAMS, and you are very welcome to do the same. It may even result in the meeting being shortened by several minutes. So the report for this is set out on pages 143 to 358 of your agenda. And please can I invite our Officer Gary Sung, who is Senior Planning Policy Officer, to set out the report. Gary, good evening and over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and good evening to all the members. Members will recall that the habitats regulation mitigation known as the Essex Coast RAMS was reported to this committee in October last year. It was noted that the RAMS is intended to mitigate against harm to protected habitat sites such as the Blackwater Estuary and the Dengie RAMS, SAR, SAC and SPA. The approach embodied in the Essex Coast RAMS was also considered acceptable by the Section 1 local plan inspector, and inclusion of a specific policy relating to RAMS was recommended as a main modification to the plan. A couple of points from the background is thus: the Essex Coast RAMS strategy document was completed in January 2019 and included visitor surveys which identified the zone of influence for each protected habitat site. This document was endorsed by Natural England. The RAM strategy further recommended the application of a tariff on residential development proposals to contribute to necessary mitigations, such that there will be a discrete charge to be applied using the habitats regulations to section 106 SIL, or in the case of BDC, section 111. As part of monitoring and review of the RAMs, there will be updated visitor surveys included within the mitigation package, which will enable the zones of influence to be expanded or contracted, and to adjust the tariff if it can be shown that the contributions are not covering the identified measures. The aim of the RAMs, of course, is to ensure that the level of bird disturbance and habitats degradation is not increased as a result of population growth and visitor visits increase for the purposes of recreation. Moving on to supplementary planning document. This is the development plan document which sets out the developer contribution. From April 2020, this should cost £125.58, plus any additional charges for legal fees and monitoring of the agreement. The draft version of the document was agreed by this committee to be published for public consultation, which took place in January. The consultation was led by Essex Place Services, who contacted following for comment, statutory bodies such as local town and parish councils, national government bodies and utility companies, business forums, Essex Wildlife Trust, Sport England and the police, developers, landowners and their agents, local businesses, voluntary and community groups, and the general public. Consultation material was available to view on Citizen Space. It was also made available to view at the council's main offices and a number of public libraries. Information was also provided on the Bird Aware website. The SPD consultation received a total of 146 comments. 87 of these from Essex residents and 57 from various organisations. This included 14 comments which were made from Braintree. The main issues that were raised are confusion about the purpose and aims of the RAMs, the scope, the detail of mitigation measures, and concerns about effectiveness. Questioning whether the right key stakeholders have been involved and the status of the protected wildlife sites following the UK's withdrawal from the European Union. Concern that the RAMs will actually enable inappropriate development to be allowed. Suggestion that the money should be spent on other projects. Questioning the calculation and definition of the zones of influence. Arguing that the tariff is set too high and contrasting that the tariff was set too low. Suggestions that other land uses other than residential should come from within the scope of the tariff. Raising the conflict between the aims of the RAMs and the aims of England's Coastal Path project. Concerns that the RAMs will impact on tourism and the ability of residents to access and enjoy the coast. Suggestions that alternatives to pay into the RAMs should either not be allowed or that alternative approaches should be more clearly set out. In response to the various comments received, Essex Place Services have produced a consultation document called You Said We Did. This is attached as Appendix 2. They were considered by the RAM steering group and a revised version of the SPD has been agreed as at Appendix 1. The main revisions are at paragraph 2.8 of the report, and to summarise a few points of change, there is a clear description of how overheads and other costs have been identified within the RAMS mitigation project, clarification to explicitly include proposals for single dwellings to be subject to the RAMS tariff, explanation of the requirements to have regards to statutory HRA procedures and on-site mitigation, further justification for including Class C2 residential institutions into the tariff scheme, clarifications that non-residential properties are excluded, clarification that the SPD is relevant to incoming national recreation effects only. This means that sites will still have to go through the HRA and appropriate assessment process for development proposals, which will explore the hierarchy of avoidance and mitigation. Explanation that the intention of the RAMS mitigation is to enable the conclusion of no adverse effects on the integrity of the internationally designated sites, removal from relevant maps of all areas in Suffolk from the zone of influence, as the Essex RAMS will not be applied there. If recommendations of this report are acceptable to the Council, we will collect the tariff set out in the SPD for all applications that meets the criteria set within the SPD from the 1st of September 2020. The SPD recommends and describes the process of collecting the tariff within section 106 or unilateral undertaking. The tariff may also be collected through section 111 of the Local Government Act 1974. This allows the Council to raise local monies in order to discharge any of its functions. In addition to the tariff, there will also be additional charge for legal fees and for monitoring. Subject to members' decision on these matters, development management team will amend the local list of validation requirements to ensure the necessary information and relevant fees are provided by the applicant or agent upon receipt of the application. The amended local list will need to be subject to public consultation. And finally, a note on a partnership agreement. This is a legal document which shows how the elected accountable body, which is Chelmsford City Council, would administer the RAMS project. The document is still to be finalised between all parties, but it's likely to include the following requirements: that a list of projects recommended by the delivery officer is reported to the project board every 6 months, and then delivered to members on the Essex Coastal Forum. The delivery officer recommends projects based on the money available, the priorities of the RAM strategy, and the best information available from rangers, Natural England, and selected wildlife interest groups. The steering group of planning officers will continue to meet quarterly and agree projects, conclude any other business, and make recommendations to the project board. The project board has agreed spending. Once the project board has agreed spending, the delivery officer will implement the project with all invoices sent to the accountable body. The accountable body will be funded from RAMS contributions sent quarterly by each participating authority. The delivery officer will also provide the steering group with an annual report to inform our annual monitoring reports. However, this means that the accountable body's costs, such as line management and accountancy, cannot be included in the RAMS tariff, and as such will be divided between the 12 participating Essex authorities. It means that extraordinary employment liabilities, such as redundancy, long-term sickness, are also not applicable and therefore liable to be divided between the 12 authorities using the same formula. The recommended decisions to members are numbers 1 through 3 on page 154. Thank you.
Gary, thank you very much for a good summing up of what is a very, very hefty document. So thank you for that. I have a couple of members requesting to speak. Councillor Cunningham, I think you indicated first.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you to Gary for that. I've nothing else to add, really. Just very happy to move officer's recommendation on page 144.
Thank you. Does that find a seconder? Somewhere? Councillor Bebb? Yes, thank you. And Councillor Bebb, you've indicated to speak. Thank you.
Yes, just 1 or 2 observations or questions. This applies to all authorities in Essex to provide some funding to provide mitigation. And I was thinking of somewhere like tendering, which is well away from the coast, which are their residents or the new houses going up there will need to contribute towards the fund. Yet over the border in Hertfordshire, they wouldn't. Just an observation. The other thing is, how would the tariff be calculated, and how have they arrived at £125? And would there be a need for all local authorities in Essex to agree to this before the scheme was agreed? That's just my questions. I still support it, but just some questions. Thank you.
Yes, fine. Gary, are you able to answer Councillor Bebb's questions now?
Yeah, thank you. The first question, I believe, would be tendering, which does have a coastline, although the garden community is quite some distance away from that coastline. However, they are within the zone of influence, so they are liable to pay the full fee. Authorities in Suffolk are not included. This is the Essex Coast Rams. They do have their own Rams, and that was calculated as being fair. It doesn't mean that there will be a shortfall in any monies that is required to mitigate visitors' impact. Turning to how the tariff was calculated, it was quite a simple formula, really. We calculated the mitigation that would be required over the lifespan of the Rams, and then added a fee to ensure that it would be in perpetuity. It was then divided by the estimated number of houses that would be within the zone of influence to be built at the time of calculation. This means that as housing numbers go up and down, the Rams tariff will need review. And it may be that the tariff will go down as housing numbers go up, or vice versa. And finally, regarding all the 11 other LPAs, they do need to agree the SPD and the partnership agreement as it stands. And we're going to be one of the first councils to adopt the SPD, with other councils following in late summer.
Thank you, Gary. Councillor Bebb, does that sufficiently answer your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Fine. Have Councillor Bowers wishing to speak next. Councillor Bowers?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairman. Just in the document, in the scope section on 3.12, about what types of applications does the RAMS apply to, it does mention that it's full applications, outline applications, hybrid applications, and permitted development. Can I just double check with the officer that with the outlined applications, that is the expectation, so it wouldn't be a situation where it could wait for reserve matters? The only time it would be considered at reserve matters is if there's some potential impacts that weren't considered at outline stage. Is that, am I right? And is that how I interpret it? Yeah.
Councillor Bowers, yes. In short, it's due to the methodologies behind the habitats regulation assessment. When a outline application is submitted, the appropriate assessment is made at that stage, and the number of residential dwellings will come out with a conclusion that if it's within a zone of influence, there is a in combination effect on the habitat sites, and therefore a RAMS fee is due.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Wrench would like to speak, please. Councillor Wrench?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My point builds on Councillor Bebb's point he previously raised, which links to the tariff. Within, I believe it's page 177, section 4.7, it does kind of indicate that that is built on the currently planned number of properties up until 2038. With what we've discussed at the very early part of this meeting, that the inspector's recent decision may mean that the number of houses has significantly dropped within Braintree. What is that likely to have a significant impact on that tariff? And also, it does say that it will be reviewed, but how quickly will that be reviewed? Will that be reviewed 6 monthly, annually, biannually? How quickly will that be impacted? Thank you.
Yes, Gary, can I ask you to respond to that, please?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the number of houses built in Braintree each, I think we are one of 12 authorities. Although we are one of the bigger authorities, I would have thought that a drop in the number of houses in Braintree might not affect the tariff very much. We are going to apply the tariff until we do a review in the future. And I wouldn't have thought that we would have had a large effect on the overall tariff. And in terms of when we're going to do a review, it's hard to say at the moment. I think that we will be doing additional visitor surveys as part of the mitigation measures, and those visitor surveys will trigger a review of the zone of influence. This will be in consultation with Natural England and our partners in the steering group. And following on from a revision to the zones of influence, we may also have to review new housing figures, and this could take a period of time, probably in the next 3 or 4 years.
Just to add, if I may, Chairman, on the housing number issue, of course, the SPD and the work done by the RAMS team has had to be an estimate of houses which will be built in those areas. If, as you mentioned, it is to 2038. So, for example, we don't have an adopted target beyond 2038. Many local authorities in the 12 don't have adopted local plan targets, so have housing targets that could be subject to change. Also, not every area of every district is covered, so we may be predicting a certain number of houses, for example, in the south of our district, and we may get houses alternatively in the north of the district, which wouldn't affect our overall district number, but potentially falls in and out of the zones of influence. So it has to be an estimation. It's obviously an estimation that's got quite a lot of science behind it, but nevertheless, it does have to be an estimation. And this is new to us and new largely to Natural England as well. And so there will be an element, I believe, of learning from best practice across the country, and for us to work out exactly how we tweak. But the spend is there. As Gary said in his presentation, the money available is then prioritised by the delivery officer, who's then able to say what schemes that money is appropriate to spend on at this time. So yeah, it is a brand new thing, but it is something that we'll have to keep under review.
Thank you for that, Emma. And just before I move on, just for interest members, I attended yesterday a virtual meeting of the Essex Coast Forum. It's the first time I've attended a meeting of that group. There was a very good presentation on RAMS from an Essex County Council officer. It was an agenda item, and he did urge all councils like us, where we have this coming to a meeting, to fully support it, and urged residents to support it. It is important for the protection of coastlines and in particular for wildlife. And I know obviously Braintree district isn't a coastal district, but we are not very far from places like Mersey and Malden. We do have many residents who like to visit those places and walk their dogs and take their children around there, and then, you know, take part in water sports and so on. So this is an important document, that we make sure that while we are enjoying the coastal areas, that we are at the same time mindful to protect them. I don't have any other members wishing to speak, but before I move on to recommendations and the vote, we have a change, an update to recommendation 3, and I think Kim Cole is just going to speak on that. Kim, thank you.
Many thanks, Madam Chairman. It's to just provide an update to recommendation 3. That delegation has already been provided to the Corporate Director for Economic Development and Strategic Development, and therefore there's no need to further delegate that power to enter into the RAMS agreement further. So I've set out in the chat function that this will change to a to note item, that the Corporate Director, in consultation with the Head of Governance and Cabinet Member for Planning, will enter into the RAMS partnership agreement upon confirmation that the legal team are happy with its content. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kim. Right. In that case, members, we've had the recommendations moved by Councillor Cunningham and seconded by Councillor Bebb. So I will move to a roll call vote. And again, you can clearly say for, against, or abstain. Councillor Bebb.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Butland.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Everard.
For.
Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Hume.
For.
Councillor Walsh.
For.
Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That is unanimous. So we now move on to item 8, which is the Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan. And at this stage, Councillor Walsh, or has he already left? I'm just looking to governance, needs to leave the meeting.
That is
Yes.
correct, Chairman.
Thank
Councillor
you.
Walsh needs to leave,
Right.
so we will just remove him from the meeting. Thank you very much, Councillor Walsh, for your attendance this evening. Thank you.
Madam Chairman, does Councillor Walsh not? There is another item, isn't there? Tiptree.
Yes, Councillor Butland, thank you. In discussion with officers, because there is just one remaining item after this, and because we will remain quorate, it is not necessary for Councillor Walsh to come back into the meeting, and he has been made aware of that.
So it is his choice that he doesn't wish to come back for it. That's all I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you,
Yes.
Madam Chairman.
No, thank you. Thank you very much.
Apologies, Chairman, your microphone is switched off.
Sorry. Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan, Regulation 16 Consultation Responses. Members, the report is set out on pages 359 to 371 of your agenda. And please can I invite Julie O'Hara, Senior Planning Policy Officer, to set out the report. Good evening, Julie, and welcome. Over to you. Ooh. Yes. Oh.
Apologies, Julie. Can you just pause one moment? Your microphone's not switched on, so I'm just going to unmute your microphone for you. Thank you, Julie. I do apologise for interrupting you. Thank you.
Apologies, everybody. This slide shows the Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan area, which was approved in 2015. The plan has now been placed on public consultation under Regulation 16. Having started the consultation on the 22nd of June, this period ends on the 3rd of August. The responses received will be submitted together with the plan and supporting documents to the planning inspector for examination. The committee at this meeting is asked to agree its response, which will go forward to the next stage, and the plan itself needs to meet the basic conditions set out in section 1.5 of the committee report. While some changes have been proposed, the intention is that these will strengthen the plan as a tool to guide future developments. The plan contents have been shaped by extensive public consultation, which has included workshops with various members of the community, from the Chamber of Trade to school pupils. There have been exhibitions, questionnaires, and communication of its progress have been posted online. This is a detailed plan, and the great deal of research and work which has gone into its production is clearly evidence. The following slides are intended to give a flavour of the plan contents. 4 residential allocations have been made. These sites comprise the local plan allocations at Tay Road, Cookfield West and Dutch Nursery, as well as a site at land north of Colchester Road, which has received a resolution to grant planning permission subject to the signing of a section 106. The signing of the agreement is now pending. This plan makes clear that future developments on brownfields and infill sites within the settlement boundaries would be supported subject to site-specific assessments and compliance with other plan policies. And this is the site north of Colchester Road. For non-residential developments, the plan seeks to encourage small and medium-sized businesses and identifies a possible need for small, medium-sized units for growing home-based businesses which wish to move on and for them to move into. To protect Cogashaw's attraction to tourists, the loss of shops to other uses would be resisted, and infrastructure improvements such as high-speed broadband and mobile connectivity would be supported in order to enhance the village's attractiveness to businesses. The plan identifies a number of open space designations as shown in this list, and these will be shown in the next few slides in a bit more detail. This plan identifies existing green and blue infrastructure to be protected and enhanced, and seeks to create connections between these areas. By doing so, it is intended that new developments will build in biodiversity net gain, and improvements in public access will be sought. Green buffers require consideration of the contribution of that site to the physical separation between built areas. Green amenity areas are areas close to the community and highly regarded for amenity value, but are not formal recreational areas. Local green space. This designation is a way of giving special protection to green areas that are of particular importance to local communities. Open space, this relates to open spaces of public value, such as parks, cemeteries, roadside verges, allotments, parks, play areas, and incidental space within streetscapes. The plan also looks at pollution and water. Policy 5 seeks to protect against pollution, as well as seeking to prevent deterioration of water quality and over-abstraction of water. It seeks to ensure that wastewater infrastructure is sufficient to service new developments. The plan also looks at where dark skies are to be protected and areas of tranquility, where areas of tranquility are important. Drought and flood, as well as requiring application of the sequential and exception tests, areas have been allocated which can be allowed to flood. And this corresponds with the latest thinking in how to deal with flood water. The efficient use of water is also encouraged, and the use of suds and permeable surfaces will be sought as well. The plan also looks at design and heritage. Plan policies seek to protect the historic environments and to incorporate good design into future developments. And a separate design guide has been produced to advise on design in more detail. And that's the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie, very much indeed. Nice to have some good slides to look at during that. Thank you. I'm just waiting to get my screen back because I can't see my chat function at the moment.
Julie, could you kindly unshare your screen, please? Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Right. Members, following that, would anybody like to speak to it? Councillor Bowers, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I just wanted a little bit of a clarification because the recommendation says about agreeing the comments in tables 1 and 2. And just looking at table 1, where it says that the council's made comments on earlier versions of the plan in the past, which have resulted in alterations. There are a few changes which have not been taken forward to this version. Now, does this mean that we've made comment, or there's been comments been made before, but they've decided not to put it in this version, or are we looking at, we're looking obviously at the recommendation of the changes. I just wanted a little bit of clarification around how it's come to this stage. Have we made these suggestions before and they haven't been put in, or are these actual fresh changes now? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Julie, are you able to help out with that, please?
Yes. The changes. These are some of these changes are changes which have been brought forward from previous recommended changes which have not been inserted into the plan, and some of them are new. I'm at the moment I'm unable to identify which one from the other, but I can give you that information later if you would like that.
So members, of course, just to make you aware, this is the second time that the document has been out for public consultation. We are not the author of the document, we are the consultee, and then we take the document through and defend it through examination. So obviously if we have made comments in the past, it's up to the neighbourhood plan group to decide whether they wish to take those comments into account or not. Some of those comments, obviously, we believed that they were critical to ensuring that it meet the basic tests. So we are proposing those comments be submitted again, so that the tables that you have before you are a full list of the comments that we would like to make on the document. The next stage for this document is an examination by an independent examiner, and therefore they would have the opportunity to look at both the draft neighbourhood plan as submitted, plus the comments of us and all other consultees during the consultation period, and then the inspector will be able to come to a final conclusion on what he or she believes is the most appropriate policies within the plan. Just to note as well, members, that we have had some detailed correspondence from Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan Group and the Parish Council today around the comments and the proposals that we've put forward in this paper, and we will have a separate conversation obviously with the Parish Council to explain the reasoning and the issues behind some of the comments that we are proposing to you today.
Thank you both Julie and Emma. Councillor Bowers, does that cover your question, or do you want to come back?
So the final decision then would lie with the inspector. That's where we're at.
Yes.
I suppose the other thing you were saying about the comments today, I suppose maybe you can't elaborate in regards getting a feeling that they're not agreeing with the recommendations, or is that just for a later liaison with the parish council? Is that what you were saying, Emma?
Emma?
So I think always within a neighbourhood plan process, it's always an iteration, and officers will advise the neighbourhood plan groups on what they believe is the most appropriate approach, and it's down to the neighbourhood plan group to decide whether it feels that advice is appropriate or not. And as we said, ultimately it will be for the inspector to determine the exact wording of the policies. But yeah, we will have a separate conversation offline with the parish council just on the comments, so that we can explain the reasons why we're proposing some of the comments that we are, which all of which are to try and help the neighbourhood plan to be as robust and sound as possible, and allow the most protection, and to allow the policies, the thrust of the policies that the neighbourhood plan group wish to put forward, to make sure that they are robust and sound and able to be applied properly, ultimately by the authority, who then must apply them when it comes to development management and planning applications.
Yeah, we can only try our best. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Councillor Bowers. I don't have any other members wishing to speak. Just before I move on, I would just like to commend the Coggeshall Neighbourhood Plan Group for the work they have done so far. And I think those parish councils, I know there are a fair few who are just embarking on neighbourhood plans, very early stages, will come to appreciate just how much work is involved. It does take a concerted and consistent effort by, generally speaking, a fairly dedicated group of people within a community. So well done to Coggeshall for coming this far. No one else is indicating to speak. Could I please have someone move the recommendation on page 360? Anybody like to do that?
Move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Butland. Can I have a seconder?
Yes.
Councillor Bebb. Thank you. Right, members, I will move to the vote and do as I've done previously this evening, which is to call your names. Councillor Bebb.
For.
Councillor Bowers.
For.
Councillor Butland.
For.
Councillor Cunningham.
For.
Councillor Everard.
For. I did want to ask a question.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm just looking to. I think I'm afraid you're too late.
I tried, but I've got a different computer here now tonight, and it's very difficult to.
I do apologise. I missed you wanting to ask a question because it didn't come up on the chat function. I'm so sorry. I think you've missed the boat now.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So could I just have your vote, please?
For.
Okay. Councillor Horner.
For.
Councillor Hume.
For.
Councillor Walsh. Oh no, sorry, Councillor Walsh is not here. Councillor Wrench.
For.
Thank you, members. That is unanimous, and that recommendation is therefore carried. Right, so we now move on to the final item on the agenda, item 9, Tiptree Neighbourhood Plan, Regulation 16 consultation response. And I'm going to ask Alan Massau to present this. The report is set out on pages 108 to 142. No, I apologise, I got that wrong. It's Gary, sorry, Gary Sung, who's going to present this. And the report set out on pages 372 to 381 of your agenda. It is a little unusual, perhaps, for us to have an item like this, which is for a neighbourhood plan consultation not in our district. But as Gary will, I'm sure, explain, there are very good reasons for that. Gary, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Tiptree Neighbourhood Plan has been in preparation since 2015 and has now progressed to Regulation 16. After this round of consultation, the plan progresses to independent examination. Tiptree is a large village within Colchester Borough. It has a strong interrelationship with Braintree District through the parishes of Kelvedon and Fearing. Residents of these villages frequently interact with Tiptree through the provision of supermarkets, secondary education and other services. In its current layout, existing and new residents of Tiptree will access the A12 and Kelvedon Rail Station via Gorpit Junction and Kelvedon High Street. This interrelationship is likely to continue in the future. To summarise the Tiptree Neighbourhood Plan development quickly, it has policies in the following areas: good quality design, residential car parking, housing and employment, Tiptree Village Centre, sustainable transport and traffic, historic environment, countryside and green spaces. Paragraph 2.4 of the report before members summarises the location of 625 new allocations for dwellings, mainly to the north of the village. There are also 429 dwellings on sites with planning permission, giving a total of 1,044, that's 1044 dwellings in Tiptree. Having examined the policies of the plan, officers have concluded the need to respond to the consultation based on the issues regarding traffic impact, parking and sustainable transport. As the A12 widening project progresses, its new junctions are not scheduled to be open until 2027/28. This means that there will be will not be a strategic relief scheme for traffic in place at Fearing until at least the middle of the Tiptree Neighbourhood Plan period. Officers therefore recommend that the council raises objections so that consideration of the A12 is incorporated within the plan's policies, such that, if necessary, planning permission should be delayed until capacity improvements to the A12 are completed. Officers have also noted that ECC have objected to the level of parking provision, which is higher than that adopted in the Essex parking standards. We also believe that this will encourage car ownership, commuting, and increase pressure on the roads in Braintree. In contrast, there is a lack of policies to meaningfully improve public transport provision. We believe that the free allocation should be modified to include consideration of traffic impact at planning application stage so that cross-boundary strategic impacts can be appropriately addressed. The Council's response to Tiptree Neighbourhood Development Plan Regulation 16 public consultation is included at Appendix 1 for members and is recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Gary. Would any member like to speak on this? I have no one indicating on the chat function at the moment. If no one wishes to speak on it, I do need someone to move the recommendation on page 372 of the report, which is that the response to the Tiptree Neighbourhood Development Plan Regulation 16 public consultation as at Appendix 1 is approved, which means that this council will be objecting for the reasons very clearly set out by Gary. Could I have someone?
Move, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cunningham. Seconder?
Yes, happy to do that.
Thank you, Councillor Bebb. Let's move to a vote on this. Councillor Bebb?
For.
Councillor Bowers?
For.
Councillor Butland?
For.
Councillor Cunningham?
For.
Councillor Everard?
For.
Councillor Horner?
For.
Councillor Hume?
For.
And Councillor Wrench?
For.
Thank you, members. That was unanimous. And members, we've now concluded our business for this evening. There is no urgent business, so I will close this meeting of the Local Plan Subcommittee at, I make it 5 minutes past 8. Thank you, members, for your attendance this evening. And for those watching